the one class of people always above the law, and supreme hypocrite weaponises human rights for strategic gain. Coming up on the Citizens Report. Welcome to the Citizens Report. It's the 18th of September 2025. I'm Robert Barwick. I'm joined today by Citizens Party researcher and writer Richard Bardon. Welcome, Richard.
Thanks, Robbie.
In this week's show, we're going to talk about the people that are always getting away with the worst crimes. And it's one particular class of them, and you can guess if you want. We'll tell you in a second. But think about it. They always get away with it, and they got away with it this week again. And that's what people should be concerned about, much more than, what country your neighbour might be from. And secondly, Richard is going to give us a briefing on a new report that's come out about just how far the US is willing to go to weaponise human rights. And it's pretty ominous what it does. And in this case, we're going to be talking about the province of Xinjiang in China. But remember, what we do in this show is not just for information. We want you to use it to help get the message out so we can change the things that we're talking about. And the way you can help with this show is help us supercharge the algorithm. Like the show, share it as widely as you can on social media. Subscribe if you're not a subscriber, and if you do, remember to ring the bell icon. You get updates as we put them up. Comment, please comment. We really appreciate the feedback, and I try to engage as much as I can. So if you're ever desperate to get a message to me, put it down below, right? And I'll reply to you if I can, or someone will bring it to my attention. Now, we also need people to donate to the cause, the Citizens Party, and I'll give you a bit of an update on some of this stuff in a second, but we're doing a lot of work always on intervening in these situations, and we're the most democratically funded political party in Australia, which means all that money comes from people like you. So if you can make a donation, please do. And we are on this ongoing membership drive. It is the priority for the party since the 2025 election. Our membership graph is just going vertical. Join us. We need your participation in our party. Feel free to become a member. Go to the membership section of the website. We're about to get registered in New South Wales, which is quite an accomplishment if we can do that. Not many parties are going to be able to do it, but we are on track to do that. And we're going to become a mass membership party. So please, don't just be an observer. Join us, right? We get many thousands of viewers of the Citizens Report every day. If you agree with us, join the party, right? It's $30 a year, and you can make a real good contribution that way. Now, also, Richard, quickly before we begin, the other thing we're doing for the next few weeks until the 16th of October, which is the wire, it's coming down to the wire, is the hearing of Dan Duggan, right? And we need people we've got this flyer circulating. Please order copies and get it out in your area if you can. It explains all the issues to do with Dan Duggan's case on the back. Very important. It's a great picture there of him and his children. Of course, he was arrested just after this photo was taken because he was arrested as he was dropping his kids off to school. And it's now been more than 1,000 days, coming up to 3 years, where this innocent Australian citizen has been in New South Wales maximum security prisons without ever having been charged. And the only chance he has to stop being extradited to the United States after the 16th of October is either the court ruling against it somehow, or there's one person in Australia who has the power to just say, no, it's not going to happen, and that's the Attorney General, Michelle Rowland. Mm-hmm. And she can deny it all if she likes, but don't believe that. We need you to help distribute that, make a donation to the family, and call Michelle Rowland, email Michelle Rowland and say, free Dan Duggan. This is a matter of sovereignty. If this can happen if it's just shocking that when the American government's coming after one of our citizens, the Australian government won't protect him because it's the American government.
Not only won't protect him, but they're paying the Americans' bill to persecute the guy.
Exactly, under the extradition treaty. It's a shocking extradition treaty we have with America. We pick up the tab. So the taxpayer, they can't get legal aid so the taxpayer can help fund their legal case.
Yeah, hence the call for donations.
But the American bills are being paid by the taxpayer, even though they're the wealthy United States.
Like if somebody wrote this in a novel,
no one would believe it.
That's not plausible.
Yeah, no one would believe it.
You know, unless your name's Franz Kafka.
Yeah. One last thing about Dan Duggan, Richard, is I want to play a video clip. Now this was posted on the Duggan team's website, but it's very revealing. And this was in 2010. And listen, watch this. I won't preempt it too much. Just watch this clip and think about what it means, the fact that this was happening in 2010. Just watch it.
The ABC's Tom Eagledon reports from Qingdao, where he's been given exclusive access to a Chinese frigate involved in the exercises.
Guns aboard the Chinese Navy frigate Luoyang unleash a barrage at a target off the port of Qingdao in northeast China. It's a rare sight. The ABC's the first Western media the Chinese Navy's allowed on board during live target practice. But we're not alone. 10 Australian Navy sailors are here to observe. They've come across from HMAS Warramunga, which is also taking part in the joint exercise. The war games show growing trust between the Australian and Chinese navies.
The first navy that China has ever done a live gunnery serial with, so that shows you the extent of how far we're moving forward.
We have a very good cooperation today.
All I'm seeing is a lovely warm hospitality, hosts of the Warramunga here in China.
The United States has been pushing China to conduct joint exercises like this with its Navy.
Now what you see there is Australian media really happy that Australia is the first country China has trusted to do joint military exercises with, and we clearly liked it. We were clearly happy to be there, right? And look, what else did it say? America was lobbying China to join the exercises too. America wanted in on the action. Well, isn't it ironic then that a former American citizen turned Australian, Dan Duggan, at that time, well in 2011, next year, it was perfectly reasonable for him to go to South Africa just for a few weeks and use his skills as a pilot, as a very highly skilled pilot, to train test pilots at this test flight academy in South Africa, including Chinese pilots, and not bat an eyelid that they were Chinese pilots, because his own country's militaries, the two countries he's identified with, militaries, were doing joint exercises, or wanted to do joint exercises with the Chinese. By the way, you can see, and you can just look this up on YouTube if you want, Australia continued to participate in joint exercises with the Chinese. From 2010 to 2018 was the last time we did it. And when they arrested Dan Duggan in 2022, things had changed so much that they got away with, for ages, and they still do, for many people who don't think about it, and especially when I see Americans online commenting on Dan Duggan, they are just a-holes. Absolute a-holes. Oh, this guy's a traitor. Well, he's not a citizen of your country anymore, buddy, is what I often comment below them, right? But they're too stupid to connect the dots and hang on, yeah, you hate China now because you've been told to. We're so afraid of China because we've been told to. But when he did what he did, that's what our militaries were doing with China. We're all buddies. We're all friends. We're all sharing each other's secrets, for crying out loud. But it's that public perception that is the reason they've got away with keeping him in prison for so long.
Yep. In the space of 4 years, they turn it around like that. That's what the propaganda machine does. If you think you haven't been propagandized, it's proof that you have.
Exactly, and we'll come to more of that in a minute. All right, so free Dan Duggan. Like I said, get that. Help us get it around. Make a donation. They desperately need your help. And send an email to the details are on there. Send an email to Michelle Rowland. Free Dan Duggan. Let's get into the show proper. The one class of people always above the law. And if you're really young, you might not remember this, but you don't have to be that old to remember that the biggest scandal, Richard, in 2008 with the global financial crisis was not how crooked the banks were. No one was really surprised about that. The biggest scandal was what happened in the aftermath, or what didn't happen. And what was that?
Nobody went to jail. Well, a family-owned bank that made a couple of slightly questionable loans to other family-owned businesses in San Francisco, 4 or 5 of them went to jail.
A Chinese.
Yeah, they were Chinese.
They were Chinese.
Yeah, Chinese Americans. But none of the people responsible for the 2008 GFC and all of the garbage that caused that, and all of the rigging rates and bribing officials, nobody went to jail.
Nobody went to jail. And we were told, and this is actually true, based on Obama's Attorney General, was his name Eric Holder?
Eric Holder, Eric Withholder, as they used to call him.
The term became they were too big to jail. Or if you bring real repercussions against these banks, the banks will crash and bring down the whole financial system.
And that was after the GFC when that was coined, because he refused to prosecute. There was a plan to prosecute that he nixed it. HSBC for laundering billions of dollars in Mexican drug cartel money.
Too big to jail. So, and Australia's no different. And this is the one class of people that always gets away with it. And you saw that this week with ASIC's announcement. ASIC, they're so stupid at ASIC. I mean, anyone who knows ASIC knows they're the most pathetic regulator in the country. Possibly corrupt, right? They, there's referrals to the NAC about their potential corruption. I've received a letter from an ASIC insider saying, yes, ASIC is corrupt.
Yep. It's worse than you know.
And it's worse than you know. That was sent to me and John Adams. We did a show on it last year. But so ASIC, no one gives them any credibility. So this week they make a big show. Oh, we've just announced the biggest fine for a bank in history, $240 million fine to ANZ. And why did they fine ANZ? Well, for stealing from dead people, which is, again, charging fees to dead people, which is stealing. And someone queried me on that this week. And can you really call it stealing? Well, Justice Hayne called it stealing.
Yeah.
Right? At the Royal, because this was a pre-Royal Commission thing. And this is what's really tragic. The Royal Commission was supposed to have cleared this up. One of the scandals of the Royal Commission was charging fees to dead people. And ANZ repeated it. And the other one was this rigging of the government bond market. Now, this is managed, the way they did this, and I won't go through all the details, you can look it up, but they managed, they were a bank involved, booked by the government to help manage this bond issue. They did it in such a way that it pushed up the interest rate that the government has to pay. And the government is us, that's our money it's paying with, right? They pushed up the interest rate so that they could profit more and the Australian people pay more on interest rates, etc. So this is appalling behaviour. Joe Longo, the chair of ASIC, called it unconscionable conduct, right? And that justified this $240 million fine. However, $240 million is 3.6% of ANZ's profit last year. Right? It barely touches the sides of its profit. And Professor Andy Schmulo, who is an expert in this area, pointed out that ASIC had the possibility, the potential, among its sanctions, it could have charged a $2.7 billion profit. And he said it's the difference between a pinprick and an amputation, between the cost of doing business and real deterrence, right? But of course, and you have to be someone who's really expert in the situation to know that was the option, because ASIC just tried to get away with saying, oh, this is such a record fine. Yeah. It's so big, right? It's so big. The reality is, though, they're having a laugh. And this was obvious that even on ABC 7:30 that night, Sarah Ferguson questioned Joe Longo, and she let him talk for the first 5 minutes about how great, what wonderful action this was by ASIC, and this is a terrible bank, etc. And then she was smart enough, and I don't give her much credit ever, and I don't really like to.
She doesn't deserve it generally.
But this was an obvious question, and she asked it, and she followed up. Watch.
You said today that there are fundamental issues with risk and compliance for executives and the board at ANZ in all of this behaviour that you're describing here. Why are there no penalties for individuals responsible?
These failures are institutional failures,
but
or organisational failures.
There are also individuals within that institution. There is no wrongdoing here that doesn't have an individual attached to it. So why no penalties for individuals?
Indeed, but there are hundreds of individuals that are caught up with these issues.
But presumably some more responsible than others.
Executives come and go, individuals come and go, systems did not function as they were supposed to function. In ASIC's view, what went wrong here was an institutional failure, an organisational failure. Having said that, for the future...
Did you consider levelling penalties against individuals?
We certainly compulsorily examined a range of individuals. Some of them are named in the court documents that were involved in this trading. But the ultimate finding of unconscionable conduct was a view taken collectively of the conduct of a whole range.
And what about in relation to the use and abuse of ANZ's own customers? There must be individuals who have overseen those actions leading to the descriptions that you've given today.
A whole range of individuals were involved in this misconduct over a number of years. The part of ASIC's job is to figure out whether a particular individual can be singled out for a special responsibility. That is not the position we took with these proceedings. We see this as an institutional failure, an organisational failure. However, I can say, Sarah, that one of the things that ASIC will be focusing on in the next 12 and 24 months is holding ANZ accountable for the remediation programs that it says it's conducting as we speak, and the senior executives that are responsible for those programs.
ASIC has brought 7 previous civil proceedings against ANZ, adding 4 more today. Doesn't that reflect a weakness in ASIC that this bank, ANZ, was able to repeat offend year after year?
ANZ has got to take responsibility for its own actions. ASIC's job is to hold banks like ANZ accountable.
But if they're able to offend year after year after year, doesn't that suggest that there's something wrong with the regulator as well as the bank?
I think it suggests there's something wrong with ANZ. ASIC is doing its job. It's holding, in this case, ANZ accountable. This is the biggest penalty ever that ASIC will be asking the court to impose on a bank with its admissions. That's 240 million Australian dollars on top of, as you say, Sarah, earlier matters. But this is a matter for ANZ. It's not to be laid at ASIC's door, misconduct or failures at ANZ.
That's the issue. She has to point out that this bank, by ASIC's own admission, has done this bad behaviour repeatedly. And so she says to Joe Longo, isn't that, if it's happening repeatedly, isn't the problem with the regulator as well as the bank? Oh, no, it's just the bank. But this is its behaviour. ASIC has a pattern here itself.
Yeah, and they brought over the now deputy chair?
Deputy commissioner.
Deputy chair of ASIC, Commissioner Sarah Court, formerly the deputy head of the ACCC, which is the only regulator that seems to me even to try to do its job and is hamstrung by ridiculously bad legislation. Competition, but don't even get me started on competition policy, but that's where they were probably happy to get rid of her. Because she did this interview, this is just indicative of ASIC's mindset. A little while ago, I think, nearly 2 years ago now, on a podcast, and she says, well, would there really be a regulatory benefit in just fining the banks for the same misconduct, CBA or whoever, over and over again? Would there really be a regulatory benefit? That's a quote.
Well, so this is the pattern. Clearly, what they're doing clearly doesn't work, and the regulator seems happy with that. Oh, well, we're just doing our thing, it doesn't work. Well, I'll tell you why it doesn't work, Richard, it's quite obvious. So if you're a bank that's made last year was like $6.6 billion, so this fine is 3.6% of that. This year they're on track, their half-year profit was $3.6 billion, so they're on track for over $7 billion this year. And you get a fine for $240 million. So who wears that? Well, the shareholders wear it, not the bank executives, right? The shareholders wear it. But because the shareholders are going to share a dividend out of a $7 billion profit, right? No shareholder's going to notice it, to be honest, because the bank management always has the right to change the dividend by a cent one way or the other anyway, right? They're never guaranteed a dividend, so the shareholders aren't going to even notice. So this is a sanction that literally nobody is going to notice as an actual sanction, whereas the real question is what Sarah Ferguson was asking, what about the executives? And what Longo couldn't answer in that exchange, he didn't want to answer, is this: he actually has very limited options against the executives. And if he had have answered that honestly, this would have contributed to the outcry about why. Why do you have limited options? There's one thing he could do though. He could disqualify the directors, right? Now, the two people who should be disqualified are the chairman, Paul Sullivan, and the CEO,
O'Sullivan,
and the CEO, ex-CEO now, Shane Elliott.
Yeah.
Because this wrongdoing was from 2019 to 2024, when Paul O'Sullivan was the chair and Shane Elliott was the CEO. Yep. Right? Those two guys, if they're not responsible, then nobody is. By the way, if you look up the details of the bond manipulation, all the names of the people involved are in the media. Every single one of them could be gone after, right? But you saw the way that Longo was making excuses. And the real issue is, why is there nothing you can do against the individual execs? Because in 2022, November 2022, the Albanese government, Jim Chalmers and the then Assistant Treasurer Stephen Jones, finally agreed to implement in what they call the financial accountability regime, $1 million fines for bank executives. And I was in Parliament that day when that agreement was made. And I had a meeting that night with a Greens staffer, and it was his office, because he worked for Nick McKim, it was his office that got the government to agree to this. Agreed to something that had been a recommendation of the Banking Royal Commission. His office had done that. He was ecstatic. We had a meeting there, and John Adams was there as well. So it was me, Glenn Isherwood, John Adams, and Fraser Brindley, the staffer. And he was showing me the headline of the Sydney Morning Herald, and we've got these, we can put them on the screen. $1 million fines for bankers, and they were ecstatic. Finally, we got something with real teeth to hold bank executives personally accountable. Within 24 hours, the headline was the opposite. Government scraps $1 million fines for bankers, because the banks got on the phone to Chalmers and Jones and they monstered them. You will not do this.
Yep.
They laid down the law, and those weasels buckled and bowed the knee. And so you can have a bank like ANZ just blatantly repeating the same kinds of activity, misconduct, appalling abuses that led to the Royal Commission and shocked everybody, and there's nothing that actually can be done that anyone will feel. This is the class of people that are above the law. It's why this party we're a dog with a bone. We will never stop going after banks. Now, you've got an example here, Richard, with so Jim Chalmers, the Treasurer, who ANZ ripped off with this bond manipulation. What's he had to say about it?
Pretty much nothing. Now, Joe Longo goes on TV and, oh, look how good we got this, preening about this record fine. And Chalmers' office, the guy who's managed, we got ripped off, but he's the one who had to sign off on it. But it doesn't affect his pay either. So he says nothing. His office says nothing. Treasury says nothing. The Australian Financial Review, one of their senior finance reporter, Jonathan Shapiro, wrote an opinion column pointing out how ridiculous this is the other day. It's just, they had, he asked them for a comment.
Yeah.
And one of Chalmers' staffers said this: "We fully support the really important work of the independent regulator to make sure our financial systems are running fairly and efficiently." Well, they're not.
No.
And if you don't hold these guys to account, they're not going to. We expect every company operating in Australia to do the right thing by its customers and follow our laws or face the consequences. What consequences?
I can imagine Albo saying, "We've made it clear.
Yeah.
We expect them to follow the law." What are you doing when they don't?
And they'll just say, well, make me.
Yeah.
And they could, but they won't.
Yeah.
Longo might not be able to, but Chalmers can. Albanese can, but they won't. And he says, ASIC falls under Chalmers' purview. So does the issuance of this government debt that they manipulated the rates on. And as he says, Paul O'Sullivan he says, clinging to the fact that ASIC couldn't prove intent, but the court filings show repeated instances in which the bank acted unconscionably and took advantage of the government. So Shapiro's conclusion is that he says the message is clear and perhaps counterintuitive. If you're going to mistreat a customer and still walk proudly in the capital markets, make sure that customer is the government.
There you go. That really is. That's all that can be said right there. Now, I want to move on, just while we're on the subject of banks, to something that is actually quite sad. But I'm going to take this opportunity to say it now because something quite embarrassing happened. Joe Longo wasn't the only person to put in an embarrassing performance on Tuesday night, the day of the announcement. So was former Senator John Williams, Wacker Williams. Channel 10, for whatever reason, had a feature on Wacker Williams. I want to play the clip, and then I want to say something about it. But Wacker Williams deserves a lot of credit for the fact that there was even a Royal Commission in the first place. He was the National Party Senator for New South Wales in Parliament, and he made it his business to take on the banks. But what's this very revealing clip from Tuesday night, where on the same night as ANZ was caught committing exactly the same crimes that led to the Royal Commission, he said this.
But now when Wacker Williams comes to town, it's for the most unlikely of reasons.
I've only got one job these days. 3 times a year, I'd have a 3-hour meeting with Matt Common in the Commonwealth Bank.
Advising the very bank he spent his life and career holding to account.
It's improved.
Thanks in no small part to him. John Williams lost his family farm in the 80s after dud financial advice from CBA. The shearer then became a senator, a voice for the battler, the first voice to call for a banking royal commission, years before the Coalition or Labor supported the idea. Now, 6 years after its damning final report, Wacker says banks are better.
And I think the Royal Commission might have swayed him that way, as saying, it's not all about profit. You got people and people's lives.
Is it care and compassion, or is it fear of being exposed by people like you or royal commissions?
Might be a bit of both.
Now, that is embarrassing, Richard. There's no two ways about it. Now, that was obviously a pre-recorded interview. Maybe if he had been interviewed on the day, he wouldn't have said that, the banks are better, because clearly they weren't, but that's what aired on the day. But I couldn't help but notice that Senator Williams is now being paid by Commonwealth Bank. And you can't separate the fact that he's on the payroll, he's got this advisory role with Commonwealth Bank, he calls it his only job, from the fact he's prepared to spruik Commonwealth Bank. And this is the bank, by the way, that took his family's property in the 80s. In the 2000s, when he was a senator and taking on the banks and agitating for the Royal Commission, Commonwealth Bank employed a private investigator to spy on him. That was a big scandal at the time, right? Commonwealth Bank doing that. And now he's there saying the banks are great. And I just think that, it's just sad that it has come to this, because they're clearly not. But they're clearly wanting to get people, get their old critics to say good things about them. I want to tell a quick story about my experience with former Senator Williams, Wacker Williams, because soon after he originally got elected, and it would have been about it's either 2007 or 2010, I can't remember which, he called up our office and he wanted to meet me and Craig Isherwood, and we went to the city and had a meeting with him. And we were comparing notes, and he wanted to pick our brains about the sort of stuff he could do in the Senate. And that was the beginning of a relationship that when we'd go to Canberra, we'd meet him, etc. After the global financial crisis, we were giving Senator Williams all sorts of important advice on and actually education. I remember the day he was the chair of the Senate Economics Committee, and he said to me, "What is a derivative?" So the chair of the Senate Economics Committee did not know what derivatives were. But that's not to his embarrassment. That's just, these things are exotic things, and they're not that easy to explain. But then that relationship came to an end in 2014, not for anything we did, but because in 2014 we brought an international expert, a real expert, to Australia to go to Parliament and talk to members of Parliament about why Australia needs banking reform, and specifically Glass-Steagall separation of banking from all forms of speculation, so that our banks are not at risk of collapsing like the American banks did in the global financial crisis. And our banks are riddled with derivatives, right? This was, as you know, this was a big campaign we ran for many years. The gentleman we brought over to Australia was from Japan. His name was Daisuke Kotegawa, and he was the former deputy director of the Ministry of Finance in Japan and Japan's representative to the IMF.
Yeah, and Kotegawa is someone who did send bankers to jail, because as the deputy director of the Ministry of Finance, that was part of his role, was being the chief of enforcement. And these were his friends, in some cases, who he said, no, you're going to jail for what you did.
Yeah, there'd been a crisis, a banking crisis in Japan in 98 and 99, and it involved derivatives and all sorts of financial gambling, and that's what he had to do. So he was an expert in regulation, he was an expert in derivatives, and I must say, as someone who represented Japan at the IMF, he was a big name on the world stage. Like he used to play, people might not remember this name anymore, but the head of the New York Federal Reserve was a guy named Timothy Geithner, right? He was one of Obama's advisors. Kotegawa used to play tennis with him. Anyway, that's the reason I'm giving you a little bit of background, is because when we took Kotegawa to Parliament, we had a meeting with Wacker Williams, we had a meeting with the Maverick Senator Bill Heffernan, a bunch of other people. They were so impressed, they were blown away, and they were finally getting the importance of this Glass-Steagall separation and get the derivative speculation cancer out of the banking system, that Wacker Williams says, you've got to meet with the Treasurer, you've got to meet with the Treasurer. So I said, okay, we'll meet with anyone. And he had my number, and he went behind the scenes, and lo and behold, he said, can you be at the Treasurer's office at this time? Got a meeting. So great. So it was me and our colleague Gabby and Kotegawa, Daisuke Kotegawa, and we go to this office, and there's Wacker Williams, and there's the Treasurer wasn't there, but the Treasurer's chief economist, Tony Pearson, was there, and a representative of the finance minister was also there. So then we sat down and had a meeting. Now, I could tell straight away that the Treasurer's chief economist was furious at having to have this meeting, because he didn't want to have, he hated the idea of having to meet with the Citizens Party, absolutely hated it. But he couldn't reject a meeting with this guy. And Daisuke was pretty strategic and savvy. And those names that I was mentioning before, he was dropping them in the small talk in the meeting, right? Oh yeah, I played tennis with Timothy Geithner. He had quite a thick accent. He said, yeah, I played tennis in New York with Timothy Geithner. And this guy was realising, this is a big deal.
Yeah, what have I walked into?
What have I walked into? And then that man, Tony Pearson, then proceeded to try and bullshit Daisuke Kotegawa. And he started off by saying how well regulated, how Australia's banks are sound, and they're well regulated by two world-class regulators, ASIC and APRA. And John Williams, Wacker Williams, he almost spat out his coffee, and he said, and this is a great tribute to Denise Braley, our friend. He said, well, I talked to Denise Braley, and I can tell you, there's an inquiry right now into ASIC. It's not looking very good at all. So he contradicted this guy from the Treasurer's office, and I think that's what ended up getting him into trouble partly. Now, I can't go through all the details. It was 15 years, was it not 15 years ago? It was 11 years ago now. But it actually descended into an argument at a certain point. And it was an argument where, because Daisuke wasn't arguing, he was stating things but because this guy was coming back at him and just clearly trying to misrepresent the truth, I was speaking up, and he and I were at loggerheads and having a war of words. And the problem was, we had to catch a plane to get Daisuke back to Sydney so he could get his plane back to Japan. And we had to abruptly leave this meeting and say, sorry, time's up, we've got to go. And when I left that meeting, I had this overwhelming thought that Wacker Williams was going to have strips torn off him by this Treasury guy for setting the meeting up, right? And the problem with Wacker Williams is he saw himself as a lowly shearer, not very well educated shearer, and he gave way too much credit to these guys with degrees like this economist Tony Pearson, who when he left Hockey's office went to work for the Banking Association, right? And he gave these guys way too much credit. And I know when I left that room that he was going to have strips torn off him. And it absolutely happened because he never spoke to us again. And years later, when one of our supporters bumped into him in New England and mentioned he was with the Citizens Party, Wacker Williams went off and said, "Oh, that party embarrassed me really terribly in Canberra, etc." No, buddy, we didn't embarrass you. You were with a charlatan. It's not your fault, but you were with a charlatan that you gave way too much credit to, and our guy exposed him for the charlatan he was, and he wasn't happy. And because he represents that evil establishment institution of banking that has done so much evil in this country, and they're determined to protect themselves, he had to have a go at you, and now you seem to have dropped the fight. Because the fight goes on, the bank's behaviour is as appalling as ever, and you're saying the opposite on national television. That's all I've got to say to Senator Williams. And if he wants to talk to me about it further, he's welcome to.
He's still got your phone number.
He's
well, you've still got the same phone number.
I've still got the same phone number, that's right. And that brings us finally to Bendigo Bank. Because what are we dealing with Bendigo Bank, right? Next week, we're coming down to the wire. It's now just 1 week. In next Thursday, that bank will close its doors for the last time. And the whole west coast of Tasmania will be left without a bank branch. And this is an absolute case for government intervention as we called for, but Bendigo is acting with absolute impunity like the other banks do because they know there are no consequences. And if you want an absolute example of that, this came to my attention this week. The people of Queenstown who have been writing messages to the Prime Minister begging him to intervene, begging him to save their branch. This week they started receiving replies, and that's always a good thing. But the replies were coming from the Premier of Tasmania. And when this was brought to my attention, I was a bit confused at first because I wondered why the people bring it to my attention. There's a great woman in Queenstown, Janet Leigh, and she brought this to my attention. I was wondering, hang on, why are you telling me you wrote to the Prime Minister if you're getting replies from the Premier? And I just assumed she'd mixed it up. She showed me the email chain. No, she wrote to the Prime Minister. And what's been happening is the Prime Minister, who has constitutional responsibility for banking and has the power to do something, whereas the Premier of Tasmania or any Premier has no constitutional responsibility for banking as such as it is. If he starts his own bank, he can.
Yeah. State banks, they do.
State banks, but federal, national banks, he's got no responsibility for them. There's nothing he can do. That Prime Minister's office has been sending those messages to him and asking him to reply. In other words, they've been shirking their responsibilities, just handballing them. That's the way this government's office runs. And the latest thing, I just want to draw attention to, we'll put a link below. Dale Webster has done an extraordinary job in a very comprehensive article called Burning Down the House about Bendigo Bank. And what she has discovered, we'll put the map on the screen please, Ben. What she's discovered is that using Bendigo Bank's own software, all those red dots you can see on the map of Australia, she's applied for loans from 1,000 different locations in regional Australia, and the red dots are where it was just blanket no, and she couldn't get to the next step. It was blanket no based on the location she was applying from, and every single one of those, without like 99.999% of those locations are mining towns, and like Queenstown. And so she has exposed that Bendigo Bank has a blacklist here where they are debanking mining towns without making an announcement as a policy. They're debanking mining towns, and with all the repercussions that's going to have. And so this is hats off to Dale Webster for this great article. Click on the link below and have a look at it. We are never going to give up this fight until we break the power of this entity that is unaccountable and more powerful than government, right? You can rely on the Citizens Party for that. All right, Richard, let's move on to the next segment now. supreme hypocrite weaponises human rights for strategic gain. And I want to introduce this by talking slightly about a different area than we're going to be talking about, but it's very important to put the context for supreme hypocrite. The UN Commission, after an extensive investigation, has just ruled that, and here's a quote, the Israeli authorities and Israeli security forces have committed and are continuing to commit genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. Now, one of the quotes, and all this is from first-hand sources, this is all compiled from, right? One of the quotes from that report says this: Israeli security forces shot at and killed civilians, including children who were holding makeshift white flags. Some children, including toddlers, were shot in the head by snipers. End quote. That's just part of the flavour. Richard, which country is most complicit in Israel's genocide?
That would be the United States of America, the shining city on the hill, or whatever they call themselves.
The land of the free and the home of the brave. And just explain, just briefly, how complicit it is. Like, this cannot be happening without Americans.
They supply all the weapons, they supply the funding. Basically, Israel, people think, oh, you know, the Israeli lobby runs America. It's the other way around. That money that they're bribing and soft-soaping these congressmen and others with comes from the US government, comes from US taxpayers.
That's right.
This is billions and billions of dollars in money that goes via Israel back to American military manufacturers, and some of it leaks out to these, you know, to corrupt members of the Congress.
Now, they're not the only country that's complicit in genocide, of course. We are too, but they are clearly the most complicit. And so this brings me to my next question. What does the United States consider to be genocide?
Well, it's not apparently mass murdering and starving Palestinians and locking, you know, in a giant concentration camp. Apparently, it's poverty alleviation and de-radicalization programs in an area of northwestern China called Xinjiang that they tried to destabilize and it didn't work. So then they invented this, they watered down the definition of genocide. They started coming up with these things, cultural genocide and this and that. That is a nonsense. That is a legal nonsense. That term has no currency or import. But it's just to muddy the waters. And so when that didn't fly, they invented this nonsense, and this is all made up, and we've proven that, and we can link some articles below. But they invented this thing, maybe it's not genocide, but they're mass detaining and enslaving these people and using them for forced labour in Xinjiang and all over China, and any company that employs Uyghurs, any company that sources materials or components from factories or farms in Xinjiang is complicit. And so we're going to pass this law to get this out of our supply chain because we don't like forced labour.
Now, I want you to describe the way the law works, but before you do, I just want to make the observation. So the people who do care about Israeli genocide and the Israeli treatment of the Palestinians for a long time have this campaign called BDS, Boycott, Divest and Sanction, to basically say to the world, look, if you don't like what Israel's doing, stop doing business with Israel, right? Don't buy Israeli products, sell any assets that are exposed to the Israeli state, and lobby for sanctions on Israel. And the Americans are one of the countries that claim that is anti-Semitism, right? Exercise. In fact, I think they're making it illegal now in America to do that, or they're kicking you out if you're involved with
multiple states.
BDS. But what you're about to go through, which comes from a report from our friend Jack James, who has done this report on America's law here. This is far more comprehensive assault on Xinjiang and China than the BDS crowd campaign has ever hoped to achieve against Israel.
Yeah. Now, on the pretext, I call it's economic warfare wrapped in sanctimony.
Yeah.
What they've done is they've decreed, based on racial profiling, and the title of Jack's paper is The Illegality of the United States Uyghur Forced Labour Prevention Act.
Yeah.
Because on the pretext of eliminating or pressuring China to eliminate this non-existent forced labour, they're actually making it that they're imposing penalties for any company anywhere in the world that buys materials from Xinjiang, and any Chinese company that wants to sell internationally or anywhere that the American, like to the American market or anywhere where they have this influence, or that has to go through American companies and say they'll cut them off, to discourage people from hiring Xinjiang Uyghurs and other minorities there who they say are being used as forced labour when they can't prove it because it's not happening.
Yeah. And every report that has sought to prove it, even before we met Jack James, we did analysis of these reports, such as the ASPI Australian Strategic Policy Institute report, which is funded by America anyway, called Uyghurs for Sale. Right, we did analysis of that report, and we could see the holes in it.
Yeah, and the other things about the supposed mass detention centres that were really just shopping centres and high schools and things. It's all garbage.
Now, the United States is the only country in the world with such a forced labour law.
Yeah,
it's extraordinary.
It claims now, mind you, and Jack points this out in her report. Jack is short for Jacqueline, by the way, for anyone. This is a Australian woman that you've interviewed. People can
put the link below my interview with Jack.
Watch your interview with Jack. But so what she's gone through in this report is that the United States, one, has existing laws to prevent the importation of goods made with slave labour or prison labour, but their own constitution allows them to do that. It's a competition measure, it's part of the Trade and Tariff. It's part of the Tariff Act of 1930.
Okay, they can use prison labour.
They can use prison labour.
But they sanction anyone else who
they reserve the right to exclude everyone else who uses prison labour or and there's these things now, these terms like modern slavery, where it's not chattel slavery in the original sense, but amounts to pretty much the same thing. And so that's what they're saying is happening to these ethnic minorities in China. But because they can't prove it, because they made it up, it's not happened, they demand that everyone prove a negative, that they're not associated with slave labour. And there's a list, and I quoted the whole thing in the article because Jack lists the requirements to prove that you're not tainted by slave labour.
Well, let me read it out. To secure an outside of scope claim by proving that nothing in their goods has any connection to Xinjiang, importers must provide, this is the quote, supporting documentation that includes the names, addresses and contact details of each producer and exporter in the supply chain, affidavits from each entity in the supply chain, purchase orders and invoices of all suppliers, packing lists, bills of materials, certificates of origin, payment records, buyers and sellers' inventory records, shipping records, and for raw materials, production orders, factory production capacity reports, factory inspection reports, and evidence that volume of inputs of component materials matches volume of output for the merchandise produced.
This is like the annual report of a major corporation just to import a bunch of shoes.
And how long do they have how much time are they given to provide this information?
30 days.
30 days. Whereas the old Tariff Act was what?
It's 90 days, and you just have to provide self-certification from the supplier and proof of due diligence from the consignee, the person who made the company or person who made the order. If customs enforcement asks for it, then you have 90 days. This you've got to, and that's not even and it gets even worse if you acknowledge that you are sourcing materials or labour in Xinjiang, because then there's a whole other list that's just as long again with even more detailed stuff that they demand on top of all those other things, and you still only have 30 days. It's if they say that you got this from Xinjiang, not if you actually did.
Can I point out, one of the friends of the show and the Citizens Party, one of our international friends, is a gentleman from New Zealand named Trevor Johnston, the reason Trevor got into this sort of political space of arguing the China issue is his job in New Zealand industry is supply chain guarantee, right? And so this is what he does for a living. He knows how supply chains work. It's his job to make sure that these New Zealand companies aren't exposed to this stuff. And he knows it's all lies about Xinjiang. But a true expert like him just gets completely blacked out while the US government gets away with forcing this on companies. And the thing is, companies can't comply, right? That means it just shuts down business.
They can't appeal. They can't comply unless they've already done all this preemptively, which only major which again, this is what major American corporations can do deals with the governments to just not look or to have the paperwork. They can afford to do all this paperwork. They've already got it. They just have to compile it. But if you're a small trader or, you know, a family business, you know, it's just too onerous. But there are no avenues for appeal. If they decide, like you can request an exemption under certain categories on this entities list, but if they deny your application, you can't appeal. And so Jack points out that that's actually arguably, I mean, prima facie illegal under the US Constitution, because the Fifth Amendment, in what's called the Bill of Rights, the first 13 amendments, the 13th of which ended slavery, chattel slavery, in America. It's illegal to impose these things. I mean, one, the supposition of guilt is arguably a no-go in the first instance, but it's there's no due process, which is supposedly guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment. And then she also goes through how it's illegal under multiple conventions, international conventions on the elimination of racial discrimination, on the human rights, on elements of the United Nations Charter, the foundation of all modern international law, and then other things that the United States has not ratified, but all the other countries have to comply with. And it insists that everybody else comply with all these rules, but that it doesn't apply to them.
And the irony is, Richard, that this is actually harming the Uyghurs.
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, people,
jobs.
And it's not in the report, but we've heard from people, from Jack James and from others involved in these, you know, global supply chains, that there are companies that are just like, they're not hiring these workers. The government's put all this effort into training and educating them and de-radicalisation programs, and now they're trying to leave those people out in the cold based on a racial profile and geopolitical games. And the kicker is that China, you know, that has been happening, but overall China economically, and Xinjiang it's barely affected. It's other countries, because of the global nature of supply chains now, the two most affected countries are Malaysia and Vietnam, because they buy raw materials and componentry from China. And there's all these massive industrialisation, cotton and other agricultural products, but also components of things like solar panels and other advanced electronics that the government has invested in building up the economy of Xinjiang. So they're selling it to friendly countries that don't care what the Americans say.
One last quick question before we go. Just to remind people, why is Xinjiang such a strategic target of the United States?
Xinjiang, one, it's incredibly rich in mineral resources. But more importantly, it's the gateway to, it's the route of the old, everybody's heard of the Silk Roads?
Yeah.
This is where they went from, where this is the Chinese end of the Silk Road.
Because there's some mountain part, like they have to go there because of this pass through the mountains.
Yeah, there's two different mountain ranges, or three, but two that you've got to go in between somewhere, and oases along the way, because a lot of it's desert. And so that's where it goes. And of course, because of just the terrain, it's also where the modern version with the trains and eventually highways will go. And that's why it's being targeted. They're trying to contain China and disrupt its relations with its neighbours and the world.
Yep, and like we said, the reason we started with the Gaza thing is to show you its supreme hypocrisy. It's not genuine about human rights, it's just for strategic gain. All right, thanks very much for that explanation, Richard. This is an article that you've written in this week's issue of the Australian Alert. So if you haven't received a copy of the Alert before, you're welcome to call in and order one. Otherwise, remember the Dan Duggan campaign. Help us get that flyer out and get the message to the Attorney General for Free Dan Duggan. Richard, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Robbie.
Thanks to the viewer for tuning in, and tune in next week for more of the Citizens Report.
Authorised by Robert Barwick, Citizens Party, Melbourne.